Check one. There we go. It's good to see everybody this morning. Let's stand. Let's focus on our on the Lord this morning, and let's think about the words of the song. Let's praise Him today.
We have heard on high, sweetly singing o'er the plains, and the mountains in reply, echoing their joyous strains. Gloria in excelsis Deo. To Bethlehem and see Him whose birth the angels sing. Come and adore on bended knee Christ the Lord, the newborn King. Gloria in excelsis Deo. Say hello to each other this morning.
Testing, testing, testing. All right, here we go. I get yelled at when I tap it like that a lot of times. Well, welcome for those who are visiting from live stream. And if you are here in the service or you want to connect, please fill out the connection card that we have in there. Also on there is an opportunity to let us know what we need to pray for. God is answering prayers in this church. We take those connection cards and those prayers, and we pray over them as a church, and then the men meet on Saturday morning at 7 a.m., and they pray over them as well. If you have a prayer request that's for the pastor's eyes only, just put that in the blue envelope. I do have a few announcements. Yesterday, we had the food bank, which is another ministry. We had over 50 families, the largest so far, come in and was able to participate. That it was 7 pallets of food. And a special thanks to, she's not here, but she wouldn't I'd go ahead and thank her anyhow, Samantha Holland, who out in the cold, freezing weather checked all these families in. So we certainly appreciate that. Also, in your bulletin, it says the Youth and Children's Christmas Party on December 20th. It's going to be downstairs and not at someone's home. So just take note of that. Okay, youth is Friday evening downstairs. Children's party is Saturday downstairs. Got it. All right, and now we have a special ministry moment.
It's easy to feel like Christmas passes us by. We've heard the Christmas story so many times that often we fail to pay attention to what God is actually showing us. Well, this is your invitation to get back to the heart of Christmas. Emmanuel, God with us. Join us for the Prepare Him Room virtual event this Christmas season. Experience a time. It's easy to feel like Christmas passes us by. We've heard the Christmas story so many times that often we fail to pay attention to what God is actually showing us. Well, this is your invitation to get back to the heart of Christmas. Emmanuel, God with us. Join us for the Prepare Him Room virtual event this Christmas season. Experience a time that is filled with worship, encouragement, and teaching that will draw your heart right back to Jesus. Whether you're watching on your own or with a small group or hosting the event at your church, you will discover the joy of the birth of our Savior all over again. So let's celebrate Christ as a community this Christmas.
Good morning. I'm Dory Moxley. I'm the women's ministry. And we're going to be hosting this event on Saturday, December 21st, here in the sanctuary from noon to 3 p.m. And we've opened it up to girls that are 16 and up. So if you have a daughter that you want to bring, please bring her with you. So next. First, we're going to have a fill-her-up hour, and the doors are going to open at noon. We're going to have, you can join us for festive beverages and coffee and a hot cocoa bar. Unlike the video, though, we're going to have a fellowship hour instead of a sit-down meal. There will be chairs for people who do need to sit down. And we're going to play like a jingle mixer during that hour as well. So we'll also next have heavy hors d'oeuvres and sweet treats, since it's noon and we like to eat. So next, at the same time and the same day, we're going to have the children's Christmas party that was mentioned. It's going to be downstairs in the fellowship hall. Today is the last day to register for the children. The little flyer that you have in your bulletin, if you want to be fancy, you can scan that and it'll bring you to a form. If you want to be old-fashioned, there's a sign-up sheet outside the sanctuary door right at the top of the stairs on the bulletin board there. If you have any questions, talk to Becky Sneed, Jenny, or Trey Short, and I believe T. Huffman are leading that up. So once again, today is the last day, so if you want to bring the kids, please register for that. Next, so, whoops, back. So let's get back to the heart of Christmas. Just to recap, we're going to all meet. It's going to be a, ladies and children's event, Saturday, December 21st, noon to 3 p.m. The women will be gathering here. It's for female friends and family. If you have family in town or visitors coming, please feel free to invite them. At noon, we're going to have the Filler Up Hour for food and beverages. The kids, it's ages 4 to 5th grade. Downstairs, they're going to have a nice Chick-fil-A lunch, craft, games, and more. Once again, register today. Did I say that enough, Becky? And for the ladies, we ask you to register by next Sunday, December 15th. And you can sign up once again with this QR code, or in the foyer, there's a sign-up sheet on the women's board. If you can't join us on the 21st, like the video said, we do have options. I can get you a link if you want to do a small group at your home. We've talked about doing another one here. So if you're interested, talk to me. And I'm also going to name Amy Neerman, because she said she would be willing to host a small group at her house. Or if you find that you just want to watch it at home, I listened to it yesterday. It's an incredible message, and there's like 40 minutes of absolutely beautiful worship music, just worshiping our new Savior and King. So I hope to see you on the 21st. I know it's a busy time of year. We're trying it out. We're having it a little later this year to do it with the children's ministry. So once again, hope to see you there, or reach out to me, and I'll get you a link, and you can set up something for your own small group. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Dory. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day, this beautiful day you've given us. Lord, we ask now that you anoint the worship team and the pastor, and so that we can enter into worship and praise and give you glory and to learn from your word. Lord, thank you so much. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Let's stand, church, as we continue our worship together.
I know who I am, 'cause I know who you are. The cross of salvation was only the start. Now I am chosen, free and forgiven. I have a future, and it's worth the living. 'Cause I wasn't made to be tending a grave. I was called by name, born and raised back to life again. I was made for more. I know who I am, 'cause I know who you are. The cross of salvation was only the start. Now I am chosen, free and forgiven. I have a future, and it's worth the living. 'Cause I to life again. I was made for more. Why would I wait a bed in my shame when a fountain of grace is running my way? I know I am yours. I was made for more. Oh, I wasn't made to be dead in a grave. I was called by name, born and raised back to life again. I was made for more. So why would I make a bed in my shame when the fountain of grace is running my way? I know I am yours. I was made for more. So why would I make a bed in my shame when a fountain of grace is running my way? I know I am yours. I was made for more. You are worthy of it all. You are worthy of it all. For from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory. Let's sing that again. You are worthy of it all. You are worthy of it all. For from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory. And all the saints and angels, they bow before your throne. All the elders cast their crowns before the Lamb of God and sing, you are worthy of it all. You are worthy of it all. For from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory. And all the saints and angels, they bow before your throne. And all the elders cast their crowns before the Lamb of God and sing, you are worthy of it all. You are worthy of it all. For from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory. For from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory. Day and night, night and day, let incense arise. Day and night, night and day, let incense arise. Day and night, night and day, let incense arise. Day and night, night and day, let incense arise. arise. Day and night, night and day, let praises arise. Day and night, night and day, let praises arise. You are worthy of it all. You are worthy of it all. For from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory. For from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory. Day and night, night and day, let praises arise. Day and night, night and day, let praises arise.
Church, let's go to the Lord in prayer this morning. Father, it's this time of year when we're reminded of the birth of Christ, when we're reminded of his first coming, a time when many people did not recognize his coming because they didn't expect it, or they expected it in a different way. And Father, as we open your word today and we continue our study in Luke, we see once again the return of Christ. And many people we know will not recognize it because they're not expecting it or expecting it in a different way. And yet, Father, we know that we need to be prepared for that time. And so, Father, as we open your word this morning, as always, we pray that your Holy Spirit would speak to our hearts, that your Holy Spirit would prepare our hearts for the return of your Son, Jesus Christ. And so, Father, as we open your word this morning, we pray, even as Solomon prayed, that you would give us a hearing heart, to hear those things that you would say to us. And so, Father, take away the distractions from the week past or the week to come, even the distractions of this day, that we might give you our attention, that we might hear what your Spirit says to us. For we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. You may be seated. Children may be dismissed. We're continuing our study in the Gospel of Luke. We are in Luke chapter 21. We're going to be looking at verses 5 through 19, so feel free to pull out your note sheet in your bulletin, or for those who are watching on the live stream, you can always print your note sheet off of the website. Luke chapter 21, starting in verse 5, Luke says, "And while some were talking about the temple, that it was adorned with beautiful stones and votive gifts, Jesus said, 'As for these things which you are looking at, the days will come in which there will not be one stone left upon another which will not be torn down.' They questioned him, saying, 'Teacher, when therefore will these things happen? And what will be the sign when these things are about to take place?' And he said, 'See to it that no one misleads you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and the time is near. Do not go after them. When you hear of wars and disturbances, do not be terrified, for these things must take place first, but the end does not follow immediately.' Then he continued by saying, 'Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be great earthquakes, and in various places plagues and famines, and there will be terrors and great signs from heaven. But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you, and will persecute you, and delivering you up to the synagogues and the prisons, and bringing you before kings and governors for my name's sake. It will lead to an opportunity for your testimony. So make up your minds not to prepare beforehand to defend yourselves, for I will give you utterance and wisdom which none of your opponents will be able to resist or refute. But you will be betrayed even by parents and brothers and relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. And you will be hated by all because of my name. Yet not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance you will gain your lives.'" In March of 1981, Carl McCune, a wildlife photographer, hired a bush pilot to drop him off in a very remote area about 225 miles northeast of Fairbanks, Alaska. He was going to go there for 5 months as he planned this trip into the wilderness to photograph wildlife. And he prepared for this trip. He flew in with 500 rolls of film, 1,400 pounds of food, 2 rifles, a shotgun, and ammunition. And he planned to photograph the wildlife over these 5 months as they were returning to their summer feeding grounds. And for several months during the summer, McCune photographed this wildlife in this remote area. Unfortunately, McCune made one costly mistake. He never confirmed the arrangements for his departure. McCune had hired or assumed that his friend was a pilot would return for him in August, but he had never confirmed those plans with his friend. McCune had hired another pilot to take him to a more remote area, but he had told that pilot not to return for him because his friend would be coming to pick him up before the Alaskan winter set in. Because of that, no one ever returned for him. As the weather grew colder, McCune's supplies eventually ran out, and he died in the Alaskan wilderness in November and wasn't discovered until 2 months later by a search and rescue team. What's interesting about this story is that during that time, McCune kept a diary. He kept a journal. And one of the last things that he wrote in his journal before his death, he said, "I think I should have used more foresight about arranging for my departure." Now, when you think about that, it's hard to imagine that someone could have taken all the detail to plan their trip and the film that they were taking and the food that they were going to bring and weapons to protect themselves against wild animals and do all that stuff on this short-term trip, but fail to make arrangements for their departure. And yet, do you know what? Many people do the exact same thing with their spiritual lives. They make every provision to live a comfortable life here on earth, but they make no preparation for a departure into the life after this. You know, the prophet Amos told the people, God's people, Israel, prepare to meet your God. The Apostle Paul in the New Testament, when writing to the church in Rome, said it is appointed for people to die once, and then comes the judgment. One way or another, all of us are going to depart from this temporary journey that we call life, and we're going to step into eternity. We need to make sure that we're prepared for it. Now, in our study today, we're going to look at the importance of being prepared for eternity. The words of Jesus found in this passage are a part of what is often referred to as the Olivet Discourse. And it is the greatest explanation of what will take place in the end times that's written. And it's found in 3 of the 4 Gospels in various forms. We find it in Matthew, we find it in Mark, and we find it here in Luke. Now, each writer emphasizes different aspects of these end time events. Now, why is that? Well, Matthew was writing primarily to a Jewish audience, and so he emphasizes those things that would have been of greatest interest to his Jewish readers. Mark was writing primarily to Gentile believers, to non-Jews, and so his account puts less emphasis on those things that were particular interest to the Jewish readers. Luke also writes to the Gentile reader, or wrote to the Gentile reader. So he also omitted some of the things that were more important to the Jewish reader when giving this overview of these upcoming events that we're reading here. Now, as we study this passage, I want you to keep that in mind, and here's why I say that. This passage was given to the Jews by a Jew about the future of the Jewish nation. This passage primarily deals with the events preceding the Great Tribulation, immediately before the Great Tribulation. Now, many, if not most, Bible teachers hold to the view that believers will already be in heaven with the Lord when the Great Tribulation takes place. In other words, the church will be caught up in the rapture to be with the Lord, and shortly after that event, the Great Tribulation will take place. And it's my understanding from Scripture that Jesus Christ will return for his church at any time, and there's really no specific events left on the prophetic timetable that need to be fulfilled before Jesus could return. So as far as my understanding of Scripture is, the rapture could take place at any time. So this brings up an important question. If this passage deals with the Great Tribulation and the church will already be in heaven, it doesn't apply to us, so then why do we even study it? And to answer that, I want to give you an illustration. Several weeks ago, I walked into Walmart. I had to go pick up some oil for my car. I was going to do an oil change, and I walked into Walmart. And when I walked in, I saw several employees busily working, stocking the shelves with Christmas items. Christmas trees, decorations, all that type of stuff. Well, seeing all those Christmas items, I knew that a holiday was coming up very soon. Thanksgiving. You know, when you think about it. They always put it out really early, don't they? One of the signs of Thanksgiving is almost here, is seeing Christmas items in the stores. Actually, you can back up to Halloween these days, or actually Labor Day, I don't know, but they put in everything early, right? So when you see one sign, you know something else is coming up further down the road. And so too, the Great Tribulation will not occur until after the return of Jesus Christ for his church. So that means something to us, significant. When we begin to see the signs that precede the Great Tribulation, that means that the return of Jesus Christ is even closer. And don't miss that fact. Because when we start to see the signs that are going to take place with the Jewish nation, we know that God is going to come even sooner. Now, if Jesus Christ were to return for believers today, would you be ready? And I want to pose that question a little bit differently too. Because there are a lot of people who go, oh, well, we don't know when Jesus is going to return. It could be, months, weeks, years, whatever. Jesus Christ may not return, but are you ready for eternity? Because every single one of us are not guaranteed tomorrow. So I want you to think about that as we look at this passage today. We know from the other gospel accounts that Jesus and his disciples were leaving the temple when this conversation takes place, and the disciples begin to point out all the beautiful stones and all the beautiful buildings that were there. To give you some background, the temple, this particular temple built by Herod the Great, was one of the architectural wonders of the world. Herod the Great never did anything small. He was pretty much a megalomaniac. Everything he did had to be the very best, the most expensive. It had to be very glamorous. And so even in building the temple, he built this magnificent temple with all the buildings. The temple area covered about 1/6 of the land area of the ancient city of Jerusalem. So can you imagine that? A temple area that was 1/6 the size of the entire city. And it was not just one building. It was a majestic mixture of porches and colonnades and courtyards all surrounding the temple proper. And it had been under construction for over half a century at this point. As I've said before, I'm surprised. I thought Stafford County was the only one that took that long to approve plans. But a little joke there, a little jab, sorry. But it was still being built, and there was still construction going on when it was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans. Now, this structure, and we don't have pictures of it today, but from what we read in historical writings, this was a magnificent structure. And there was a lot of interesting ideas that were behind the design of this. It was built of this brilliant, polished white stone. Solomon's porch was 1,562 feet long. To give you an idea, that porch was basically 1/3 of a mile long. And then there was another porch called the Royal Porch. It was decorated with 160 columns, stretching 921 feet in length. And these columns were 40 feet high, and each one of them was made of white marble of a single stone. Every one of them was just one stone, a 40-foot-long piece of marble that had been carved into this column, to be made into a column. And the columns were ornamented with these vines fashioned out of solid gold that were 6 feet long. It was an amazing sight to behold. It's no wonder the disciples were sort of wowed by what they had seen there. But what's interesting also about the temple is the eastern wall of the temple's main structure was covered with plates of gold. And the wall displayed its brilliance because when the morning sun came up over the Mount of Olives, the sunlight would hit that eastern side of that wall and it would reflect. And there were certain writings back then, ancient writings, where it said that when people would come and they would see that eastern wall, it was so bright they had to hide their eyes because of the reflection of it. You know, you ever been somewhere where, you know, you hit a reflection and it's just like, you know, you got to look away because it's just messing up your eyes. It was that brilliant. Writing about this, the historian Josephus said this: "The temple appeared to strangers when they were at a distance like a mountain covered with snow. For as those parts that were not covered with gold, they were exceedingly white." I understand that because I remember the first tour I ever took over to Israel. And when you see some of the buildings over there that are made out of white limestone, you can see them from miles and miles away. You can be on a tour bus and you can see them for, one of them I checked out, you could see it for 30 miles away. You could just tell because of the brilliance of that white stone. Now, as Jesus and the disciples are leaving, the disciples are commenting on the beautiful stones that they see here and the beautiful buildings that they're seeing here. And then Jesus says something that is going to totally stun the disciples. As they're commenting all this, Jesus says, "As for these things which you are looking at, the days will come in which there will not be left one stone upon another that will not be torn down." Now, you know, we could read that thousands of years later and we're not surprised by that. But I would imagine that this was inconceivable to the disciples. This magnificent series of structures that took up 1/6 of the entire city, and it's going to happen to one day where not one stone is going to be left upon another. Imagine if I stood up here today and said, you know, before long, there's not going to be one stone left upon another. The White House is totally going to be destroyed. The Capitol building is going to totally be destroyed. The Washington Monument is going to totally come down. First of all, you might not believe me, but if you did believe me, you'd say, wait a minute, what is this? Is this like the end of the world? Most of you, or many of you, remember September 11th, 2001. And you remember where you were when you heard the news. Because I remember I was sitting in a coffee shop down in Fredericksburg. I was having coffee with a couple of the police officers down there, and I get a call on my cell phone. And I opened my cell phone. It was a flip phone back then. Some of you remember flip phones, you know. And I flipped my phone open, and a guy I knew from church called me up and goes, "Hey, did you hear what just happened?" And I said, "No, what?" And he goes, "A plane hit one of the Twin Towers." Well, my first thought was, well, how could that happen? I mean, Cessnas that's a no-fly zone for small aircraft. Some guy flying a Cessna would run it into a Twin Tower. He wouldn't even be flying in that area. And I said to him, I said, "Well, how did that happen? What is a small aircraft doing in that area?" He goes, "No, it was a commercial jet." And I'm like, "What? Why? How? With all the controls they have on a commercial jet?" It still wasn't clicking in my mind. I was still just thinking, you know. And he goes, "No, they think it's a terrorist attack." So I got in my car, drove to my office, turned on the TV. And the second plane that hit. And I remember looking at the TV thinking, am I seeing the fulfillment of prophecy? Is this the way the world's going to end? Jesus tells his disciples, you see this beautiful temple? It's going down. And it's going to be leveled. And there's not going to be one stone upon another. The intense heat that resulted because the Romans came in and they laid siege because the Jews were rebelling in 66 AD, and the Romans came in and they laid siege to this temple and to this area. And eventually they took it over, and the original command by Titus was not to destroy the temple. But because of some things that went on and some miscommunication, a fire was started in the temple. And because of all the wood, it burned it to the ground. And when it burned it to the ground, all the gold that was in the temple melted and seeped down into between the cracks of the stones. And so Emperor Titus wanted the soldiers to retrieve that gold, so he had the soldiers go in, and all the Roman soldiers pulled one stone off of another to get all of that out. And so literally, it was exactly as Jesus said, that there would not be one stone left upon another which would not be torn down. Every single stone was dismantled in the temple. Now, Jesus didn't tell the disciples about the destruction of the temple because he wanted to rain on their parade. In other words, they're like, hey, Jesus, look at these beautiful buildings and all. Yeah, well, they're all going to be torn down. Oh, bummer. He wasn't just trying to bum them out by this. He was trying to realign their priorities about the reality of what was really important in their lives. The disciples were impressed with all the external appearance of all these buildings. But Jesus wanted them to focus not on these buildings, but instead on the God for whom these buildings had originally been built. He wanted them to focus on the internal, that relationship with God, not the outward external buildings. And likewise, Jesus doesn't want us to get caught up with external appearances. It's easy for us sometimes to put on an appearance, especially, you come to church and it's been a rough week or a rough day, and you come in here and you sort of have to put on church faith. You know what I mean? You have to look good, and it's like you're in the car, to get out of the car. Oh, praise the Lord! How you doing? Oh, hallelujah! And sometimes we do that, But Jesus wants us to work to look at the internal, what's really important. The disciples didn't doubt what Jesus told them about the temple, but now they have more questions. And so Jesus and the disciples are going out to the Mount of Olives. They cross over the Kidron Valley. They go into the Mount of Olives, and they're over there. And 4 of the disciples, from what we can tell from the other accounts, come to Jesus. Peter, James, John, and Andrew. And they come and they question Jesus about these events. And they ask Jesus 2 questions. The when question and the what question. When will these things happen? What will be the signs of your coming and the end of the age? Now, if we were to ask that question, we would probably be thinking about something in the very distant future. But the disciples thought it was going to happen very soon. They thought it was going to happen within days, maybe weeks, at the most months. Just a few chapters ago, we remember the story of Jesus walking through the town and visiting the home of Zacchaeus. And Luke tells us that Jesus told the disciples during that time a parable. And notice what it says here. Because Jesus was near Jerusalem and they supposed that the kingdom of God was going to appear immediately. They thought, you know what, it's going to happen anytime soon. Jesus is heading towards Jerusalem. This is where it's all going to go down. This is the showdown at the OK Corral. This is where it's all going to happen. And Jesus is going to prepare himself and he's going to set up his kingdom. And it's all going to happen now. And they were just ready for it to happen. From our vantage point as believers, we're looking for 2 things according to Scripture. We're waiting for Jesus to appear in the clouds and be caught up with him. It's often referred to as the rapture of the church. And I want to run a rabbit trail here for a minute. You'll have people that will argue with you and go, well, you know what, the rapture of the church is a false doctrine because, nowhere in the Bible does the Bible say rapture. You know what, let's just dismiss that argument real quickly here. The word rapture is actually from the Latin word raptus. And the word raptus means to be caught up, to seize, to kidnap, to take by force. That comes from the Greek word harpazo, which is used in the New Testament, and that's the word that's usually translated, rapture, or what we call for rapture. So when the church is taken out, it's going to be taken out by force. It's going to be brought out by force. And so that's where we get, from harpazo, we get the word in Latin, raptus, and that's where we get the English word rapture. So while the word rapture isn't technically in the Bible, the concept, the belief, the doctrine is found in the Bible. And as far as I'm concerned, I believe that it's a picture of when Lot and his family were taken out of Sodom and Gomorrah because the angels took them out by force. And so I believe that we will be taken out by force. But we're also waiting for Jesus to come back to earth with believers to set up his kingdom on earth. We see that in Zechariah chapter 14, verse 4. So Jesus explains to the disciples that certain things have to take place before all these events happen. So they're looking at like, okay, it's going to happen in a couple days, it's going to happen in a couple weeks, and he's going, no, there are certain events that need to take place first. So he's trying to slow the roll with them a little bit, and Jesus begins to answer, but notice he answers with a warning. He says, see to it that no one mislead you. Now, if Jesus says, see to it that no one mislead you, obviously there's a possibility of people being misled. So he goes on, he says, for many will come in my name saying, I am he, and the time is near. Do not go after them. So Jesus warns them that if they see this, not to be misled. How do we avoid being misled? Because we live in a time now where, I mean, you turn on the radio and every time or this TV or whatever, and what's everybody, oh, misinformation. That's misinformation. That's misinformation. How do we know what's right? I'll tell you how we know what's right. The only way to be sure that we're not misled is to become a student of the Scripture, to become a student of God's Word. And I want to encourage you to take time to read through the Bible. And not just do a reading through the Bible, but also to study the Bible. I encourage people to take that time just to study the Word, and that's exactly what we're doing right now. You know, as we're going through the Gospel of Luke right now, we're going through each week, we're going chapter by chapter, we're going verse by verse, we're studying the Word, we're studying it in the context in which it's written. I'm not just picking verses here and picking and choosing which ones I want you to hear and which ones I don't want you to hear. I'm going through this in a systematic way. And, you know, many of you are in other Bible studies during the week. And I invite you, you know, if you're not, you know, some people are afraid of the Old Testament. You know, you don't need to be. Come on a Wednesday night. And when I say come on a Wednesday night, you don't even have to leave your house. We do a Zoom Bible study on Wednesday night. You can sit at home in your bunny slippers with your cup of coffee, and you can watch the study, and, you know, you can just enjoy learning about the Old Testament. We're in the book of Isaiah right now. We go through a chapter, sometimes if I'm really, you know, busy, 2 chapters in a week or something. But we're going through and we're studying and we're understanding a lot of what the prophecies were back in those days and how they applied. And, you know, I'll tell you one thing. The neat thing about prophecy is when you see prophecies that have been fulfilled and you watch that in the Scripture, it really boosts your faith. Because you see, you know what, God said this before and it happened, and so I have every hope that everything He says and every confidence that everything He says is going to be fulfilled. And you know, I think it's important. People who make a habit of reading the Bible and studying it are not easily misled. Jesus gives a warning about being misled because He says, many will come in His name. In his first epistle, the apostle says, children, it's the last hour, and just as you have heard that Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have appeared. Now you hear that, and let me explain something here. The word Antichrist with a small a means against Christ or in place of Christ. Many people have come who are against Jesus Christ, or they're trying to replace Jesus Christ. In the end times, the ultimate Antichrist, the Antichrist with a capital A, will appear on the scene to deceive the entire world in the Great Tribulation. But these Antichrists, and again, small a, will be coming saying, well, I'm the one, I'm he. Now, I want you to notice something here. If you look in your Bible, the word he is probably in italics, or if it says I'm the Christ, that's in italics. And the reason being is because that word is not actually there in the original text. It's put in there to make the sentence make sense, but it's not really there. If you read the exact translation of that in the original Greek, what it's going to say is, many will come in my name saying, I am. Now that should be a flag right there, because what's the name I am? I am is the name for God. Many people are going to be coming saying, I am God. Who was the woman that was out on the beach? Remember the New Ager? I can't even think of her name. But she was like, I am God, I am God. And I always thought that was really funny because, you know, she's out there on the beach screaming, I am God, I am God. And, you know, there's a bunch of angels in heaven going, what is that down there? I don't know, I hear something going, beep, 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 beep. Lord, what is that? You know, don't mind, you know, ignore it. But you know, it's crazy. There are these people who come that say, you know, oh, I'm God, you know, and we see that all the time. We see these false leaders come along. Jesus says, when you hear of wars and disturbances, be not terrified. Do not be terrified, for these things must take place first, but the end does not follow immediately. Oh, by the way, that was Shirley MacLaine. That's who it was. I couldn't remember who it was, but we got it now. I need your help, guys. Come on now. But anyway, connect here. You know, it's this interaction here. But anyway, he says, don't be worried about these things that are coming up. You know, the characteristics that follow that Jesus mentions here happen in every generation, ever since the beginning. You know, you can't turn on the news without hearing about some war or some disturbance in the world. But Jesus says, look, don't be terrified by these things. There have always been wars. There's always been earthquakes. There's always been plagues. There's always been famine and natural disasters. You know, according to the Canadian Army Journal, there have been an estimated 15,000 wars on the planet Earth since 3600 BC. 3.6 billion people have been annihilated through these wars. These types of things have happened all along. What Jesus is saying is that when the end times come, they're going to increase in frequency and they're going to increase in intensity. Mark and Matthew, in their gospel, describe it as birth pangs. And every person who's here, who's a mom, if you've had children, you know birth pangs. What happens with birth pangs? When a woman's about to give birth, the birth pangs become more frequent and they become more intense. And so too, when the return of Jesus Christ is near, these events, these wars, these earthquakes, plagues, famine, natural disasters, they're all going to increase in frequency and in intensity. In addition to this, there's also going to be cosmic disturbances because he says there's going to be terrors and great signs from heaven. Jesus now tells his disciples what's going to happen before these events. And he says to them, now remember, he's writing to a Jewish audience. He's writing to Jewish believers. And he says, but before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and they will persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and prisons, bringing you before kings and governors for my name's sake. You know what? Go to the book of Acts and you see exactly what Jesus was talking about. Because when we get into the early church in the book of Acts, what happens? The Jewish leaders in the synagogues are the ones that are persecuting the Christians. They're the ones that are dragging them in before the Sanhedrin. They're the ones that are dragging them in before the governors and the kings. They're the ones that are trying to make an issue with them. Many of them were thrown into prison for their faith. The Apostle Paul is the one, when you go through the book of Acts, who stood before kings and who stood before governors. Now, it's important to understand something about prophecy here. Many events foretold in prophecy have a dual fulfillment. And by that, what I mean, there's a fulfillment in the near future that the prophet was talking about, but then there's also fulfillment in the far future or the distant future. The fulfillment in the near future was often a preparation for something that was going to happen in the distant future. Jesus says, not one stone's going to be left upon another, because the armies are going to surround Jerusalem. AD 70, 40 years after Jesus said that, what happened? The army surrounded Jerusalem. Jerusalem was taken down and leveled. You see, after the temple was burned down, Titus basically had them go through and cover everything up, take all the buildings down and just level it and turn it into a field. And that's why it took so long for excavations to find like the Wailing Wall, which is basically the foundation of the Temple Mount and things like that. But you see, there's also going to be a time during the Great Tribulation when the nations of the world will surround Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the hot spot in the world. When you look around, when you look at the news, if you want to know what's going on in the world, look at what's going on in Jerusalem. Now, Jesus tells them that this persecution will lead to an opportunity for their testimony. In other words, God's going to allow this to happen to accomplish a greater purpose. You know, God doesn't allow persecution of his children for no reason at all. There's always a greater purpose for it. And he's going to use this persecution as an opportunity for them to share their testimony. And what we see is as they share their testimony, what happens? The church explodes. You know, we always want to avoid persecution, but let me tell you something. When you look at it historically in the church, every time the church has been persecuted, two things have happened. It's purified and it's multiplied. Whenever you look around the world, you know what? If you're in a persecuted country, you don't have sissy, wimpy Christians. You know, we don't like persecution in this country, but you know what? We have a lot of shallow Christians in this country. You look at a lot of these countries where it really cost them something for their faith, you know what? Their faith means something to them. And they're willing to live for it. And they're willing to die for it. You know, we see an example of this when the Apostle Paul stood before the Roman governors Felix and Festus and before King Agrippa. He stood before them because he knew that was what God was calling him to do. And Jesus says to him, make up your minds not to prepare beforehand to defend yourselves, for I will give you utterance and wisdom which none of your opponents will be able to abide, resist, or refute. You know, when you think about that, when we are students of the Word and we are studying the Word and we have the Word in our heart, guess what? When the time comes, God will bring that back out. You know, when he says don't prepare for beforehand, he's like, don't make a speech beforehand of what you're going to say to him. You know, but he still wants us to prepare beforehand. We need to be in the Word of God. We need to be in prayer. We need to be ready, as Paul says, in season and out of season, to give an answer for those who ask us, to give a defense for our faith. And so we need to be ready for that. But when it comes to the specific things we say, God will bring those things to us. He will tell us what we need to say, just as he promised to do that with them. The Lord promised through the Holy Spirit to give them the right words. And I tell you what, if you're ever going out and you witness to people and all of a sudden you've had that experience where, you start to share with somebody, and all of a sudden the verses that you may not have read them for 3 months, but all of a sudden, boom, they're right on the tip of your tongue, and you're like, man, where'd that come from? I mean, I've had times where I witnessed to people, and I wanted to go back and take notes on what I said, because I was like, man, that was really good, and I know it didn't come from me, And so, God will give us what we need to say, but, the Lord gives them words of encouragement and consolation as he wraps up here. And he says, even though family members and friends, they betray them, he says, not a hair on your head will perish. By your endurance, you will gain your lives. Now, I want you to understand what he's saying there. Jesus is not promising them physical safety, because he just says later on in that, they will put some of you to death. That's not what he's talking about. When he says not a hair on your head will perish, he's talking about you will not perish eternally. Nothing of what you have done will be lost from an eternal perspective. There are a lot of Christians who are martyred today. In fact, we read about the martyrs in the early first century, but more Christians have been martyred in the 20th century than in any other century cumulative in the past. There are more Christians being martyred today around the world. There's 53 countries where you can't talk about Jesus Christ or carry a Bible. But he says, you know what? In the long run, eternally, you are not going to perish eternally. The sacrifice that you make for the gospel will not be wasted, even in physical death. And by their endurance, they will gain life. And what he means is the life that's true life, and that is life eternal. The irony in life is that when we endure suffering, what does it do? It produces endurance. It produces patience, and it accomplishes God's purpose in our lives. You know what? None of us like to suffer. And a lot of churches don't want to talk about that aspect of Christianity. But James said, consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith does what? It produces endurance, and let endurance have its perfect result, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Do you want to be a perfect and complete Christian, lacking in nothing? Guess what? Suffering's on the way. Because people are going to take what you say about Jesus Christ and go, you know what, you're an idiot. You believe that stuff? You believe some book that was written 2,000 years ago and just a bunch of authors put that together? But you know what, when you read the Bible and you study prophecy, you realize, you know what? God had his hand on every bit of that. I always get a kick out of people that go, see, Daniel is such specific prophecies in the book of Daniel. I'm going to go over a couple minutes, but God bless me. Anyway, Daniel is such a specific prophecy that many Bible scholars that are unbelievers said, oh, well, you know what happened was somebody else wrote it after all these events took place because they're way too specific, and then they just put Daniel's name on it. There's a problem with that mentality, because when you go to it, it's the Old Testament book of Daniel. It is in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, and the Septuagint was written before that. And so basically, there's no way, because it was already written before these events had taken place and after that. So I don't know how to even explain that. I'm going to get really too deep in stuff that I don't have in my notes. But basically, the Septuagint proves that, you know what? It was written by Daniel. It was written beforehand. And so Daniel prophesies these events. He names names. I mean, prophecy is amazing. There are 23,145 verses in the Bible. Take my word for it. I counted each one this week. No, I'm kidding. But of those 23,145 verses, 8,352 relate to prophecy. Now, I'm going to crunch that number for you. That means that 27% of the Bible is prophetic. God often uses prophecy to warn believers to prepare for the future. We're going through the book of Isaiah. God is consistently warning Israel, if you do not repent, if you do not turn, Assyria is coming, and they're coming for you. God is giving us prophecy today to warn us about the events that are coming. Now, there are going to be those, and you talk to people, and I love using prophecy as an opportunity to share with the people, share the Lord with people, and all. But you know what? A lot of times people say, well, you know what? Yeah, I hear about this stuff and all that, but it's Jesus is coming back. Well, it's been 2,000 years and Jesus hasn't returned. Why should I really be worried about it? It's never going to happen in my life. And I go, oh, you know what? Scripture just talks about you. And they're like, what? And then I take them down to 2 Peter 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 3 and 4, where it says, in the last days, mockers will come with their mocking, following after their own lust and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since our fathers fell asleep, all continues just as it was from the beginning of creation. I said, even Peter knew by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit that there were going to be people that would say that would say, oh, well, Jesus isn't coming back. He hasn't come back for 2,000 years. Jesus says he's coming back like a thief in the night. He's going to return when people least expect it. So here's a tip for you. If you read a book where it says when Jesus is coming back, that's not when he's not coming back. So, you don't even have to read the book. Save your $10, whatever. But, he's going to come back at a time that we don't expect. The Lord promised to return. He keeps his promises. We need to be ready. If you've never made a commitment to Jesus Christ, I want you to do that today. I want to encourage you to do that. Do not leave here, because even if Jesus doesn't return this week, you could see him. You could be standing face to face with him today. You could be in a car accident. We don't want to not be ready. Now, I want to offer you a challenge too. Christmas time is a great time to witness to people. But they're already thinking about spiritual things a lot of times. According to Pew Research Center, 47% of Americans believe we are living in the end times. That means pretty much almost 1 out of every 2 people believes we're living in the end times. That is a great way to start a conversation with someone. You get to talk to somebody and go, hey, I've been reading some stuff lately. What do you think of all the events that are going on in the world right now? Do you think we're living like in the end times and all? And see what they say and see where the Holy Spirit leads you into that conversation, because that may be a great opportunity to share Jesus Christ with someone. I think it's an incredible opportunity to share our faith with others. How do you think it's going to all end? How do you think you're going to prepare for that? And then when they say, well, what do you think? I'm glad you asked. I've got the answer right here. Let's prepare ourselves for the Lord's return. And let's share our hope with others. Let's pray. Father God, we thank you for your word this morning. And Father, we thank you that we have your word. Father, may we treasure your word. As the psalmist said, your word have I treasured in my heart that I may not sin against you. May we treasure your word as we look at it and understand the times in which we're living. We don't have to look to the news or the media or social media or anything else to find the answers. The answers are in your word. And so, Father, may our hearts be prepared for the return of your Son, Jesus Christ. This season, as we celebrate his birth, may we also celebrate the fact that one day soon he's returning. And we pray that we would be those who go out and share that hope with those in a lost and a dying world. Father, if there's anyone here today who's never made that commitment and says, today I need to make that commitment. I need to know that I'm right before God before I step into eternity. That they could say, Jesus, I admit that I'm a sinner. I've lived a less than perfect life. I haven't lived up to the standard required in heaven. But I believe, Father, that you sent your Son, Jesus Christ, to die on the cross for my sins, my past sins, my present sins, even my future sins. And that in that belief, his shed blood covered every sin I ever committed or ever will commit. And I ask him to come into my life and make me that new creation. And so, Father, I pray for anyone who makes that commitment, that right now you would bear witness to that change in their life through the work of your Holy Spirit. For we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you all.
Let's stand, church, as we close in song.
Hallelujah.
reminder to try to reach someone today that you can share the Lord with this week. Have a great day.